I've always wanted to try this. May regret it. I don't know. But we're going to try it this time. This week we're talking about conquering fear. And Dalton put together some notes on this, and I'm excited to dive into it, man. How are you doing?
Oh, doing pretty good. Not too bad. Yeah, these are definitely like some quick notes. Obviously, the Bible has a lot to say about fear. Um, I think there's like 365 verses in the Bible that specifically talk about fear, which is pretty cool. It gives you one for each day of the year. And so, but today we just have 4 points on conquering fear, just figuring out some different ways that we can address it when it comes. Um, and so, yeah, if we want to go ahead, I'll just hop in our first point here.
Yeah, let's do it,
Um,
man.
for Christians, our first point focuses on the assurance of God's presence in times of fear. In Isaiah chapter 41, verse 10, it says, "Fear thou not, for I am with thee. Be not dismayed, for I am thy God. I will strengthen thee, yea, I will help thee, yea, I will uphold thee with the right hand of my righteousness." In the story of Peter walking on water, Matthew chapter 14, 22 through 33, we see how Peter's fear was calmed when he focused on Jesus and stepped out in faith. And this narrative reminds us that when we fix our eyes on God, we can overcome our fears and doubts. And so, for us as Christians, we remember our purpose is pretty much what drives our fear out. Is we remember that God is God. He gives us a purpose, and so when we focus back on Him and what He has us doing, it kind of makes fear just dissipate and disappear because we know that. Uh, um, I'm thinking that verse Romans 8:28. For all things work together for good to them that love God and to them that are called according to His purpose. And so there's all kinds of awesome aspects. And if you look at this from like a non-religious point, um, one thing that it really pops in here is what you fix your eyes upon. And so when problems come your way, when fear comes, because that's how fear works, it's not just a constant with you; it's waves. And so as fear comes, it helps us to focus on what the end goal is. And so as a non-Christian, if you focus on what the end goal is and understand that the fear that's coming of what may happen is just an obstacle to overcome, it helps you uh, overcome it a whole lot quicker. And so I don't know
Right.
how else to better say that, but any thoughts on that?
Well, I think, yeah, what just came to mind was like I've heard this said a lot before, where it's like if you're afraid or if you have anxiety about something, it's like fear is a good indicator that you're headed in like the right direction. Especially when it comes to like imposter syndrome, where um, you're afraid of taking the next step because you feel like you're out of place, right? Like you're moving up, and that can be a little bit scary, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's a good indicator that you're outside of your comfort zone, which then leads to growth and leads to, in this context, following purpose. So that's just my thoughts.
Yeah, like uncertainty. Yeah, like because obviously there's fear and uncertainty. Because our brain immediately starts to run through of how many terrible ways this could turn out versus uh, what is it most likely to turn out to be. And
Right.
so, but yeah, feel you there. The second point centers on the power of faith to dispel fear. So in 2 Timothy 1:7, it says, "For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of sound mind." And as we look at the story of David and Goliath, we witness how David's faith in God's strength enabled him to face his giant with courage and overcome his fears. Like David, we can trust in God's power to conquer our fears. And so, in this story, this really does it's relate directly to faith in God and just following through His plan and knowing what His plan is. Um, and so, as he's facing this huge, huge giant, he knows that what he has behind him which is kind of to a degree, it's knowledge. He knows that God has his back. And so David doesn't fear going up against a Goliath because he knows that he has what he needs to overcome it. And so for us, sometimes when an obstacle or something comes after us, immediately sometimes our instincts is fear, and a lot of times we just need to remember what we learned, remember what we've gone through. We can go through this too. We can conquer this too. We're capable of doing it. Other people have done it before. So that's what I kind of grasp from this. But I don't know what's your thoughts on this.
No, I think you said that perfectly, man. I don't really have anything to add, but I mean, you've all heard those quotes where it's like, you have all the power within you, that sort of thing, whatever. But in a sense, it is true, right? But it's definitely very corny.
It is corny, but I do think it's a little corny because it leaves out the possibility of failure. And so like David went out there and faced Goliath. Goliath is he's 3 times size the problem than what David is. If you think about it, he's like, I don't know how tall David was, but he was still like a teenager, or we think he was a teenager. So I mean, unless he was a tall kid, he's maybe 6 feet, and Goliath was what, 15 feet tall? Like he was a huge dude, or 14 feet. I can't remember how tall he was, but huge guy, muscular. He's carrying all this heavy armor and equipment, and it was just a big problem. One thing that David didn't worry about also because he had faith in God, that God would give him the strength to overcome this giant, um, is uh, is that he wasn't afraid to fail. He knew his life was on the line on the battlefield, and he wasn't afraid to fail. A lot of times, our life isn't on the line. It's an obstacle that if we fail out, cool, now you've learned. So now you are better equipped now to be able to overcome it the next time it comes. And so,
Yeah. Yeah, that's absolutely it, dude. Like, it's weird, and this is a weird example, I think, but like it's the thing of learning, right? Where um you have to be okay with failing, right? And
mm-hmm,
this example is definitely weird, but like teaching my dad how to use a phone, he's like, I'm like just trying to teach him simple like steps on how to use this phone, and he'll be like, should I push here? I'm like, yeah, that's where you're supposed to push. Press that button, and then I'll be going walking back through it again. He's like, should I push this? It's like, just try it, right? If it doesn't take you where you want it to go, back out. Like, and in a sense, fail at using this app, use it this software. I don't know. It's
mm-hmm.
just like he'll never learn how to use the phone if he's not okay with messing up and having to back out of wherever the heck he just went. So weird example, but it's just, yeah, it's the reality of it. Same with
Yours, I
like
don't.
life and business and all that.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm still that way. I'm sure I'm still that way to a degree, but I used to be the way where like I have to watch somebody do it, and then I'll do it, and I'll execute it the same exact way. And so like I don't know if that's like maybe where he's directing in his mind. He's like thinking, well, if I just watch somebody do it, then I can imitate it and do it as well.
Mm,
And so it's kind of like an imitation. Uh, you're just imitating what somebody else did, and so it's a way of learning. You just watch somebody do it. But I don't know. Our third point here, though, moving on. Third point, emphasize the importance of seeking peace in God's presence when fear arises. As seen in Philippians chapter 4 and verse 6 and 7, it says, be careful for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, that your requests be made known unto God, and the peace of God, which passeth all understanding, shall keep your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. The story of Elijah finding God in the gentle whisper in First Kings. I was actually going to use a different illustration here, and I wrote on this one, I guess. So 19:11 through 13 says, teaches us that God's presence brings peace and reassurance in the midst of fear and uncertainty. through prayer and seeking God's voice, we can find comfort and strength. And this kind of goes back to what we were just talking about. We jumped ahead of ourselves a little bit. I did. Um, but of just sometimes there's uncertainty, and a lot of times through uncertainty, we end up fearing and creating scenarios in our mind that are probably not the most likely outcome. And so when we just come back to God and rely on Him and understand that, hey, He's got us, and regardless what happens, it's going to be good for His cause, as long as we love Him and uh, keep our relationship right with Him.
Yeah.
So keep our eye on the purpose. And
It's
so,
definitely a hard one to. It's easier said than done, right? But it's worth it. It's I think it's also like a practice. Like you can't just like you can't just be like, all right, I'm gonna be careful for nothing. I'm never gonna worry again, and then you worry the next day, you know. So it's like one of those daily things. And we had someone on the show like a while back where it's like they were talking about failure, and the way they viewed it was lessons and then an everyday thing that they learned that they had to consistently like beat into their mind, you know.
oh yeah, they had a really good quote. It was the Millers. I think it was the
Hmm.
Millers that we had on. She had an awesome quote. And now that you mentioned, I can't remember it. But I remember it was really good. Um, it's basically failure is your opportunity to learn. And then if you learn from it, it's no longer a failure. Uh, Kind of something like that. The way she worded it was much better. Um, but yeah, it was a great thought on that.
You want me to read First Kings 19:11 through 13?
Yeah, if you want to.
All right, so First Kings 19:11 through 13 in the KJV, it says, "And he said, Go forth and stand upon the mount before God, or before the Lord, sorry. And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great strong wind rent the mountains and brake in pieces the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind, and after the wind an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire a still small voice. And it was so, when Elijah heard it, that he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood in the entering in of the cave. And behold, there came a voice unto him and said, What dost thou here, Elijah?" Is that the correct 3 verses?
That is the 3 verses I have written in here. Um, was not the point that I had. I must have gotten my notes crossed, but that's all right. That's okay.
It's a good
The
section of
point,
verses either way, man.
yeah, the point is still there. But no, I mean that is First Kings 19:11 through 13, but I think I had a different illustration that I was
Mm.
using in there. But so that threw me off. That's all right. Um, Now, our fourth point here highlights the courage to trust God's plan and timing. And this one's really hard. I hate doing this one, but because it's you have to wait on Him. So even in the face of fear, you can bring some inspiration here from Jeremiah chapter 29:11. It says, "For I know the thoughts that I think toward you, saith the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you an expected end." And one of the awesome stories here is the account of Esther, as she is courageously approaching the king to save her people. If you know the story of Esther, very complicated situation that she was in, but because of her marriage and the particular seat that she held, um, she was able to save ton of people, just because of how she slowly worked things and waited on God's timing. There was definitely God was involved in that, and just everything kind of tying together slowly, and not trying to rush too fast, to get to a conclusion. And lots of things that Esther is about keeping calm, remaining calm as well. Um, and so it demonstrates, Esther 4:14 demonstrates how God can use our fears and uncertainties for his greater purpose. By trusting in by trusting in God's providence, we can find courage to face our fears with faith. And so, yeah, the story of Esther is just a awesome, awesome characteristics to overcome fear. Patience was one of them. Have patience for the timing. It's not uh, problems come and we don't know how big they are, and a lot of times they're smaller um, than what they seem, or God just needs to work a little while for this problem or this situation to kind of resolve itself. And so, definitely lot to learn from Esther there when facing fear.
I think you're the one that told me that patience isn't patience is a verb, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like not a state of mind, but it's more of like a working towards while waiting or something like that.
Um, yeah. So it it it's not it's not a verb. It's a noun. um, but it's the suffering. If it's patience is the suffering of afflictions, pain, toil, calamity, um, or I'm looking up here in the Webster's, propagation or other evil with a calm, unruffled temper, endurance without murmuring or fretfulness. Um, Patience may spring from constitutional fortitude, from a kind of heroic pride, or from Christian submission to the divine will. And so uh, I don't know if that answers kind of brings more light to that situation, but
Yeah, yeah, that's just something I came to mind as all, man.
oh no, that's all good. But any other thoughts on that? I know you know the story of Esther pretty well. Um, but
I agree with you. I think that, I mean, the whole waiting is hard, but I feel like with practice, that's the only way it becomes easier.
yeah,
But it takes a lot of practice. I mean, I'm still working on it for sure.
yeah, it's something that like you just have to. Yeah, it's something that's daily, and so it takes small steps and small initiatives of doing something about it, acknowledging when you're in that mindset of things aren't working out right. I'm fearful of how these things are gonna, end, and just kind of you let the stress of it so overwhelm you that your mind gets cloudy, that you end up forgetting other things and you end up start becoming um, unreliable in a sense to yourself. And sometimes it gets so bad that you're unreliable to others. And a lot of times, if you can acknowledge when you're in that area of fear and realize, you know what, like there's a few things that I've been saying to myself, like when I get myself in these situations, like Dalton, how many other people are going through something way worse, and you are so concerned about this? Like this is little. This is nothing. Like there's somebody else standing in a courtroom right now having to explain something very complicated, and this is, you're concerned of whether your vehicle is your car, whether it's your transmission or your engine, I don't know, just something simple, and it's like a lot of us go through some very simple things, and our lives really aren't that complicated. We overcomplicate them, and
Yeah.
and we think that we have it like the worst. And so like I'll tell you right now, my life is awesome. I don't always act like it's awesome, but with the little amount of problems that I have, I'm getting better at addressing fear when it comes and these things that I'm worrying about. And because I don't know if I think just everybody has it, but some people in my family have it pretty bad where any situation that comes, they immediately imagine the worst possible uh, outcome. And like I notice a lot of times, like after the fact, after it's all done, that the worst possible outcome that I had figured out in my head of what am I going to do with this, preparing and preparing and preparing, and then like it turned out better than what I thought the outcome would be. Like the normal outcome. Like, and so I think a lot of times we do it to ourselves. And so, but
Yeah.
I've just been getting better at like seeing it and then being okay. This is good. And then God also helps because you know that it's gonna work together for good for Him. And when this life is over, I'm not gonna have to worry about it anyways. So I'll be in heaven. So I don't know, but just a different way of looking at things helps to overcome.
Right.
So I talked a lot there, but anyways,
No,
any other last thoughts?
no, I think that's good, man. I think that's good. Yeah, I think there's a couple quotes by like Seneca, Marcus Aurelius that really kind of just hit home on what you had just said, where it's like we worry about the thing, or we suffer more in imagination than we do in reality, right? And I get myself caught in that all the time. So anyway,
That's what like I was like putting this together and I was thinking about my New Year's resolution as well. Like my resolution was not to be so easily in very I don't know how I would say a very uh, more articulate way to define it was not to let things so easily overtake me in my mind this year. And so like my resolution was basically just forget it. Like that was like basically I think I told you. I used a different word than forget, but basically forget it. Not a Christian word, but forget it. Just don't worry about it. Just and that's been super healthy for me. These honestly this year it's just been super awesome just for me to like stop worrying about little stupid things that aren't big. Um, and honestly, just over the last few months of this year, it's I've I've lived a whole lot less stressful, and so, um, but yeah, so many things we worry about and overcomplicate.
yeah, I think perspective just helps really, where it's like you just go outside and I mean, like just go shopping and then look around and be like, well, I, I'm not on the street corner begging for some money or food. Like that's not me right now. So my life's pretty good. That perspective where it's like if you stayed at home, you'd still be worrying about your own problems, thinking it's the
Yeah,
worst in the world, but not in reality, no. So
and it helps you to focus on becoming better, and so
yeah.
realizing that you're not at the worst. But
Well,
anyways,
I like this live format, by the way. I think we ought to set like a scheduled time each week and just hop on and do this. And maybe we could stream to Instagram, who knows? And just see who shows up. Maybe no one shows up, whatever. But it's kind of fun.
yeah, it
Like a
was.
show, really. Very cool. I don't know. Maybe I'm getting ahead of myself here.
That's all good.
Anyways,
Well,
man, I will catch you next week then.
all right, we'll catch y'all next week.